Hey guys, thanks for stopping by the Peace Garage. One of the questions I get asked quite frequently is when you're rebuilding your engine or building a new engine, what should you have the machine shop do, what should you pay for, and what should you ask them to do? And mostly, how much does it cost? Now, this 289 1962 Studebaker engine, I'm going through the rebuild right now, and I just got all the parts back from the machine shop, so I figured this would be a good time to share with you what I had done, why I had it done, and how much all of it cost. We'll go through the block, crank, heads, and pistons, and I'll explain to you why I had done what I had done and what you could possibly have done if you elect to, but at least the bare minimum what you should have done when you take your parts to the machine shop. So let's start with the block. Now here's what the block looks like after I get it back from the machine shop. In case you forgot what it looked like before it went there, here's a picture of what it looked like before. So based on what it looked like, you're obviously going to want to have the machine shop degrease the block, and they clean it in many different ways. They can bake it and do many different things if they bead blast it, etc. So have your block degreased and cleaned up. Then you want to have it magnafluxed. And when they magnaflux the block, and you only can do that for cast iron, they're checking for cracks. You want to check for cracks inside the cylinders, so you check all the cylinders for cracks. So degreasing, magnafluxing. Then I always have them install the cam bearings. I have them install the cam bearings because they have more precision or a more precise tool than I have, and it's really not that expensive, so I have them do that. I also have them, they will also install your soft plugs. The core plugs on the side, they're going to take the old ones out, make sure that they're clean, no pits around the perimeter, and then they'll install the new soft plugs. And soft plugs also includes any oil plug, oil galley plug that may be in the block, the ones that are gun drilled from the back all the way through, the side ports. On this particular one, there's one at the bottom. There's actually one inside of this bore where the distributor goes, and the ones up front here, the front drilled holes. So they're going to replace all your plugs, soft plugs, and drill out, or not drill out, but clean out the threaded plugs. You also want to have the prep for assembly. So prepping for assembly is cleaning it, make sure that it's ready to go, make sure that there's no scale or nothing broken, etc. They'll prep it. So that part of it, the degreasing, magnafluxing, installing cam bearings, soft plugs, core plugs, and prepping for assembly, that'll cost you about $245, which isn't too bad. Now the next thing, cleaning up the block. If you're going to have the engine rebuilt, and since this engine was so old, what they're going to do is they're going to measure, and you have to measure the roundness of the bores, how round they are and how big they are. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the worst cylinder, and you're going to figure out what it takes to make that round, and then bore it to that size. That's one method to do it. Or you just say, I'm going to clean them all up, and I want to go with a standard piston that's 30 thousandths over. So they're going to bore the block and then power hone it. And power honing is when they put it on a deck where they're same thing that uses the boring tool, only the hone is powered. So it's directed, and it's not a handheld thing. It's very precise and very precision machine. So I also have them do that. They do that, and then they have them look at the lifter bores. And the lifter bores on this are very similar to a Chrysler, to 906,000. So I have them clean up the lifter bores just by honing them out very lightly. And you can see, if you can see, inside there is a spot where the oil or the lubrication comes in. And I really want to show you that. So let me back up here for a second. See, the sun's starting to come out. Nice sunny day in December. Oh, by the way, happy holidays to all my friends out there if you're watching this, because this is the day after Christmas I'm making this video. Okay, so you see inside there, that oil hole in there has got to get to the lifters, and that's how you keep everything gets lubricated, pressure up to the lifters and around. So you just have them clean up your lifter bores, so when you put new lifters in, or if you're going to reuse the old ones, there aren't any scratches or gouges. The lifter is a lot harder than the bore, so you want to have that cleaned up. So all that work, having it bored 30 thousandths, getting the cylinder or the bores power honed, and cleaning up the lifter bores, that was $220 for all of that. Now, I'm going to flip the engine over, and we're going to talk about the lower end of the engine. So here's a better look at the core plugs and the other plugs that you're going to have the machine shop do that work. And the reason I have them do that work is because then they guarantee the work. And the guys at J&L, they do a superior job. I've never, ever, ever had a problem with any of their work. So the craftsmanship of the work is very, very important. Now, on the bottom end, what I have them do is, now here's something here. A couple of these screw holes were all buggered up. So they had to put some helicoils in there. 4 helicoils total, about $8 a piece. So they put those in for me. And I have them do it because they have the tools and I want to do that while they're cleaning up the block. Then what they're going to do is they're going to line check. They're going to check the bore. And they're going to clamp up the block and they're going to check the bore with a bore gauge, and they're going to make sure that it's nice and straight. And then what they're going to do is after they clamp up the main bearings, they're going to do with the bore gauge, they're going to check the inside diameter of this bore. And they have to do that because they have to grind the crankshaft. So they have to know how much to grind each journal. And they want to match the journal on the crank to the bore in the block. So $32 to get that these helicoils put in, and then to have them check the clearance check the mains is about $65. So that's what's done on the bottom. Now let me flip it back over and we'll talk one more thing about machining. The last thing would be machining your deck surface, okay? So the machine shop should at least look at the deck surface and to see how bad it is. You can see there are some pits in this block, but they're not bad enough, and they're not in a bad enough spot. It's not around the cylinder where you had to have the whole deck faced off. So we were lucky there. But if you do have to have it decked, you want to have them cut the minimum amount possible so you don't disrupt the flatness of the deck. You know, you got to check it 2 ways. You got to check it this way and that way to make sure that it's flat. They did that for me. That's part of the checking for assembly. They did that when they had it on the hone. So they check and make sure that everything's flat. And if you need it at that time, have them machine the deck surface off. Now, depending on how much they take off, how straight everything is, and what they have to go through to do that, you might pay a couple $100 for that. Also, if you have any pitted surfaces on the front, or if you, depending on your engine, you might have some on top. You might have to have some parts machined up just to have it cleaned up. So, a couple $100 for that. Now, also, if you have a block that has these kind of pins in there for the head, these kind of pins are very hard to get out, and these have been in there for 54 years or so. And in order to get those out, you'd have to put a cramp on there and try and wiggle them out of there, and you end up destroying the pin, and you just can't get these pins anymore. So the machine shop, I asked them to be very careful, go around these pins, clean up around the pin, but leave the pins in there. There's one in the front and one in the back. And you leave those pins in there, and that's going to help a lot for if you have an engine where you can't get pins. Most of them are split. You've seen them, there's a split, and it's a spring pin. You can like pull them out, and they're easily replaceable. These are not easily replaceable. So, all that work, boring, honing, machining, assembly, soft plugs, degreasing, magnafluxing, checking the cylinder bores, the lifter bores, putting in those helicoils on the bottom for me, clearance checking the rod mains, doing all that stuff. Total for the block is about $562 worth of machine work for this block right here. Now, let's talk about the cylinder heads. For the cylinder heads, it's usually best to pay for a package, like a valve job package. And what I usually get for that is, what they'll do is they'll disassemble the heads, take them all apart, clean them, degrease them, magnaflux them, check for cracks anywhere, make sure they're all cleared up, and then what they'll do is they'll precision mill the face. They'll clean up the face here to make sure that it's nice and clean. They'll do that. And part of that is assembly. So they'll put new valve springs in, they'll put in the seals, the new locks, and they'll assemble the whole thing. So, and they'll also grind the valves. So when you get new valves, you put the new valves in, they'll also grind the valves, put in new seats where they have to be put in, and then do a precision 3-angle valve job on the valves themselves. So the package for the cylinder heads is $320. So that includes the cleaning, magnafluxing, assembly, all that kind of work. Then they install, what you can't see, but the valve guides that are inside, installing the bronze valve guides is like $88. And then 8 of the valves had to have new seats put in. So they put the new seats in. That was like 88 bucks or $11 a piece for the seats. So they do all this work and they clean it all up. And when they say prep for assembly, they spray on a cast blast. Since you have raw casting there, that they clean it up and they spray this cast blast on there so you don't have any rust. So if you're not going to use it right away, you don't have to worry about it rusting. So altogether on this block was about $490 for the head work, and that does not include the parts. Now I'm just talking about the machining work and what you're going to have done by the machine shop. I have them assemble the heads as well, because they're going to do the valve job. They have the right tools to put the springs on. You don't run the risk of using a valve spring compressor and have it slip off and hit and scratch your head. So I have them assemble it, and it's worth it. So without the parts, you know, we're talking 480 bucks for the cylinder head work. The last thing I have them do is clean up and mill the exhaust faces so that they're all flat with each other so you won't get any exhaust leaks. And in this case, they milled the 3 on each head, and that was 80 bucks. So it takes our 480 bucks up to $560 for all head machining and all the machine work. So cleaning up the exhaust faces is something I like to do, make sure that they're nice and clean and the gaskets will seal, won't get any leakage. Now for the crankshaft. They're obviously going to have to grind the crankshaft based on the years, and you want to have it ground so that all your journals are the same size. Now if you remember in the block part, we talked about sizing the main bearings. So the machine shop should size and measure with a bore gauge. They're going to measure all of the main journals, and then they're going to grind the crankshaft to match the measurements from the bore gauge on the block. So grinding and polishing that. And they also do the same thing for the pins, for the pistons. They're going to measure those. Now you don't want to touch it. Keep it clean as possible. You don't want to get anything on your crank because that is a polished surface and it's easy to scratch. You don't want it scratched. So grinding the crank down to size and polishing it is 225 bucks. And depending on the shape of your crank, it might cost a little more or a little less depending on how much you're taking off. But these were machined 20 thousandths off the mains and 30 thousandths off the pins. If you remember, I have a video that showed the crank before, and there were some pretty significant ridges in there, so they had to grind 30 thousandths off. So grinding a crank 20 and 30, 225 bucks. Now, hey look, the Buffalo Bills lost again. The next thing I have them do is I always have them balance the parts. Now, balancing the crankshaft is important because obviously if you have any vibration, or you're going to wear your bearings faster. This crank, when I took it out, the bearings were in very good shape. They were worn as expected, but I still have them check the balance. They put on a dynamic balancer, and it's balanced much like you have your tires balanced at the shop. They spin it. The computer has an accelerometer in there. It measures which direction is out of balance, and then they balance it by hand. And the guys they'll do it by taking some material off. They'll come and they'll grind down the crank in certain spots to take the weight off and then balance it to make sure that it's balanced. And so even though this engine ran well, it was still out of balance. And they spent some time balancing the crankshaft for me. That ran 275 bucks. So crankshaft machining, 225 for the grinding and polishing, 275 for the balancing. And I'll tell you, it's well worth it because the vibration robs horsepower, and an easy way to get your engine back to its original horsepower is to make sure that it's all balanced. They balance it at the factory, but you want to have it checked to make sure that it's perfect. So 500 bucks for the crankshaft. Yeah, that's Shelby snoring. Yeah, there's security. Yeah, great, huh? All right, let's talk about the pistons. Oh, you guys, one last thing. Before you put your crankshaft in order to clean it out, make sure you take an air source and gently, you don't want to scratch your crankshaft, so gently go to each one of your holes here and blow out your crankshaft so that if there's any fluid left in there, any chips, you want to get all those out of there. Go through the mains, the pins, blow it all out. Make sure all those oil holes are very, very clean. Take your time and blow them out. You don't want to use any fluids, just air. Make sure it's nice and clean. Then you'll have a crankshaft that's ready to go in, and you won't have to worry about any chips, like I said, or any grinding material coming out and ruining your fresh bearings. Okay, now, pistons. Since the block was bored 30 thousandths over, we have to put new pistons in. So to remove and replace the pistons costs 96 bucks for that work. And then what they do is you keep the rods. The rods are in good shape, and you get those flattened and make sure that they're straight. They check the rods, but they're going to press out the pin, put it on the piston, and install it, and make sure that the rod and the pin and everything works and lines up just right. Now, this particular rod is on the, instead of being pressed in, it's held in with this pin. And this pin has a flat on there like that, and that holds the rod onto the wrist pin that goes through the piston. And torquing these things down is kind of tricky, but it's not unlike many other older engines that have a very similar one like this. Ford used to use it a lot. And when you put this pin in and you torque this down, after you torque it down, you have to really go in there with a drift and hit that pretty hard, like with a brass hammer. To what you are trying to do is you're actually seating, and I'll try and show you what I mean by seating. You see that little line there? Like right, let me get a pencil. You can see there's a line right around there. That is where this pin was seated against the rod. So even if you torque this down and you have the torque set correctly, it's not really seated against that hard wrist pin down there. So you have to hit it to seat it and then retorque it. If you don't, it'll come loose. Even though you have a lock washer in there, it'll come loose. So these have to be seated. And then, of course, they're going to bolt up the new bearing in the rod, and they have to do that because they have to size the crankshaft the same way they did with the main bearings. Okay, so 96 bucks to remove and replace the piston heads. Now the balancing, the 275 bucks for balancing the crank was actually for the balancing the rotating assembly. Okay, now when you get new pistons, you should have the machine shop. This is the sheet that comes with the pistons, and it tells you about the bore diameter, clearance, what clearance you're supposed to have. Now, when they measured the crank, and I had them measured, they gave me the clearances. Every one of the clearances for the rods was 2/1000 or 1.9. They were right on, and there's a taper there, so they know what it's supposed to be, the piston taper. And then he puts the numbers. I ask him, I want to know what he bored and stroked and what they honed it to. So here you can see that was the bore, was 35985, and then they honed it to 35925. So 7/1000 or so for honing. So they're going to provide that sheet to you. So the balancing. Now, these pistons, or when I took these out, you remember they had these little caps on there? These are like little locks that go on these rods here. If you're going to put these back on, you want to balance the assembly with that on there, because those, let me see, move that away. Those weigh roughly about 1 gram a piece. This is just a piece of stamped steel, and it's very light. I am not going to put these back in, because if you look at the size of this nut and what it gets torqued to on that fine thread, this is doing very little. It really was over engineering, and they put too much effort into that. And the second reason I'm not putting that back in is there's a risk of reusing these or putting new ones in, and I don't want to run the risk of these falling off and being in the oil pan. Will it happen? Probably not. If you're a purist and you want to assemble it exactly, you can put them on, doesn't matter. But in hundreds of engines that I've done, I've never put these back on, never had a problem. So the other thing is these rod pins. So now some people will say, well, you got to change these bolts and the nut. Not true. These are not a torque to yield fastener. It's a hardened bolt with a pin with a key. It's kind of keyed in there with a flat. It's not going to spin. It's not going to break loose, and it's not going to crack unless it's completely damaged. If you take it apart and there's something wrong with it, yeah, go ahead, replace it. But it's not absolutely necessary. So they're going to replace that, and when the machine shop, J&L is great. When I'm all done, they balance the entire assembly. So they'll put the crank and bolt everything together. And then they provide me with this balance sheet. Not like an accounting balance sheet. But anyway, they'll give me the specs here to know that the 289 crankshaft was balanced as follows. The piston weight, 637 grams with the pin. The rings were 48 grams. Locks were balanced without the locks. Total rod weight, 196. For the insert, 48. Rotary. Now this is the rotary motion, or the rotary weight. is 462 grams. Reciprocating rate is backwards and forwards. So you got rotary weight and reciprocating weight, two different weights. This was a 50 grams for that one, so the entire bob weight 195 and 952.5. But you don't really know that. But you see here they put a note on there: clean oil holes thoroughly. Okay, so you should get this with your crank and your pistons when you get them back, so you know what it was balanced to. I think that's enough detail on these pistons, particularly for the Studebaker. We talked about the pin, seating the pin, the drift pin, hitting that with a mallet or with a drift pin, brass drift pin, to make sure that it's seated. And I talked about those little keepers. There's a special name for those nuts. I just don't recall offhand, and I'm sure someone will comment and leave the name. So that is the, even though it was 96 bucks or so just to remove and replace the pistons, the balancing of the crankshaft, that 275 bucks, included the pistons with balancing the pistons. And you can see, let me see if I can find one. Yeah, you can see here, when they get balanced, take a little bit of weight off the rod on this reciprocating weight. So this is removing reciprocating weight because this part goes up and down, right? So this is how they lower the, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. Reciprocating up and down. Rotary is the round and round. Reciprocating is go down. So that's how they balance it. They take a little bit off the bottom of the rod to balance them all, and they're all balanced just a little bit, and they're all balanced individually. If I were to go through all these, you see they're all balanced a little different. So even though the rods came from the factory and it was balanced, now it's balanced perfectly. They all match. The entire rotating assembly is balanced. So there you have it, guys. What does it cost to have your parts machined, and what you can have done, what I had done for this particular engine. And going through what the totals are for the block: $562. For the heads, it was $576. For the crank, for the grinding, polishing, and balancing, was 500 bucks. And the rods, $96, for a total of $1,746 worth of machine work. That's only labor. That does not include any parts. That's just the machine work and the labor for this particular engine. Now, I hope that gives you a better idea of what you might expect when you go to have your block and all your parts machined, and how much it really costs. It's not cheap, and if you recall, in my engine building series about engine building, I talk about partnering with your machine shop. It's very important, to me, it's very important that you have a good relationship with the machine shop, because they're going to give you all of the numbers, all the measurements, all the weights, everything you need to do. They're going to call you when they think that something needs to be done. Paul from J&L, he calls me all the time. He says, hey, look, we took this apart, it doesn't look right, can you stop by, we want to talk about it. So I get to talk about it before they move ahead, and there's no rush. The last thing you want to do is rush through your machining process. So take your time, work with your machine shop, know the guy. Get to be his friend, because you got to work together. If you go to a machine shop and the guy won't show you the block or show you the parts while they're machining it, if he won't call you, if you can't call him, if you can't stop, if you have no communication, go somewhere else, because you don't need that kind of aggravation. You need communication, you need accuracy if you want to be successful. It really is that simple. Now, I'm lucky. My machine shop guy is really close. He's less than a mile away, and I can stop by there anytime. Anytime, and he'll welcome me in. I can walk in his shop and he shows me exactly what's going on. We talk through all the parts that are going to be machined. We talk through it, and what he thinks, what I think, and we kind of work together. It's a collaboration. So even though I'm explaining you how to do this, I don't know everything, and I admit that. But when I work with someone and we come up with we put, more heads, two heads are better than one. When we get together, we come up with the best way to approach putting an engine together, machining the parts, and what parts are really, really necessary. I hope that helps you out. Thank you guys for all your text messages and comments, because they really help out, and especially all you guys on the Studebaker forum. I appreciate that. I did have a great video conference with my friend, my new friend, the owner of Studebaker of Australia, and the Australian Studebaker clubs all over. You guys are fantastic. I'm glad you guys are getting a YouTube video or YouTube channel together about how to, so you guys can do this stuff yourself and help people around Australia do that. That's really cool. Thank you for the phone call, and I appreciate all your comments. Next, we'll be building this engine. I'll be putting this together. We'll probably do a couple segments. We'll do a short block, and then we'll do the long block that has the intake manifold and startup. So stick around for that, or stop back for that. Once again, thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage.